Come on. Join us. Oh. Why am I the only one up here?
You can join us.
Just for our internal group here, as we wait for starting online, for all of you to know that we have presentations that are from the class, but we also, through this journey, we have the opportunity to work together with Rick, having lunch, exchanging ideas. That also brought Daniel, that also brought Isaac and Alberto from the Invert. So the Invert, that you see there, we visited them, had an interesting conversation, like 2/3 of the course, and we found that was a very interesting synergy and a great partner to have conversations. So we decided to do the event, including them. Thanks for coming and joining us here. Welcome to the Institute of Design. So this is more for our internal conversations after we have the presentations, which they will also do a presentation. We're going to have question and answers, and for us to continue the conversation. But just want to welcome Rick. It's from here. Daniel has interacted a lot with us. For those who don't know, Daniel worked when we had the Kresge Foundation grant, and we had the Flag Calumet project. Daniel worked a lot with us, helping working with communities and planting trees and working on the Flag Calumet. Great to have you back here. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everyone here in the room, and thanks for everyone joining online as well. So we're looking forward to share with you what we have been doing throughout the semester at our Sustainable Solution workshop class. So hopefully we'll take you through a journey today on exploring with us the long-term infrastructure investment opportunities for EV charging and controlled environment agriculture. Again, as Carlos said, we're delighted to have the Invert joining us to present their work. The Invert are actually a subsurface real estate complex in the south side of Chicago, and we'll have them as well. My name is Deaa. I'm a PhD student here at the Institute of Design, and I was helping guiding the class with Carlos and Jordan, who's another PhD student, joining us through online on the YouTube streaming. So again, thanks for everybody joining us online. I know people are from all over the world are joining us, so probably staying up late in some part of the world. So I'll just go through the agenda. I'll be coordinating the event today. And our agenda is going to go through, we're going to do a very short introduction by Carlos, and then we'll start with the EV charging team, then the controlled environment agriculture team, and then we'll finish with the Invert, and then we'll have a Q&A by that. So without further ado, I'll invite the EV charging team to join. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for those here in Chicago, and welcome for everybody that is around the world and joining us online. I'm Carlos Teixeira. I'm a faculty member here at the Institute of Design. I'm also the director of the PhD program, and I was the instructor, or I am the instructor for this course, the Sustainable Solution Workshop. So I just want to give a minimal context of what happened for this final project come to life as we are presenting here today. So just to situate the work that we have done, at the Institute of Design, we are a graduate-only school in design. So we have master degrees and PhD degrees. This course is a master level course, and we have 11 students taking this course and working on the projects. This is a course that runs for 14 weeks. It's team-based, project-based, and focus on specific topics that we explore throughout the entire semester. We partner with one of our PhD students, Jordan, that works at Omers Investment, which is an asset management pension fund in Toronto, Canada. And he was guiding us through this idea of investable infrastructures. The course, as I said, runs for 14 weeks, and we have trying to experiment and break away from the paradigm that design has worked in the last 2 decades, which is you do research so that you can do design, and we try to invert this process by primarily focus on prototyping from week 2 on the course. So kind of rescuing the most important aspect of the design know-how, which is prototyping. It's about ideating and generating and generative thinking and using that as a source of research. So the idea of doing research through design rather than doing research so that we can do design. When we worked with Omers, one of the key principles that was driving this entire project is the notion that capital allocation, long-term capital allocation is going to be one of the most transformative forces in the 21st century. Where capital in large scale it's being allocated now is defining the future that we will have. So when we think about where capital is being allocated now for the next 30 years in terms of energy transition and sustainable food systems, the decisions are being made now because investments are being made now for long-term investments. So we work with this concept of designing the infrastructures of tomorrow, but thinking them about the ability of them being investable. And investable in the long term through private investment. So we focus on this concept of everyday infrastructures. And the 2 main ones that we selected for the course were EV charging stations, which we believe that what is going to be the concept that emerged about EV charging station is going to be one of those systems that is going to shape the 21st century in terms of energy transition. We also believe that control environmental agriculture is going to be able to redefine food systems. So taking those 2 everyday infrastructures and looking them from an investment point of view, we also added 4 principles into investigating their future. One is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The notion of that there are asymmetries of powers on the way that decisions about those functionalities and those infrastructures are used, and be able to understand how to be more inclusive, more diverse, and more equitable when making those decisions. A second one is about sustainability, understanding that those infrastructures, they are nexus and axis of resource allocation and flows of resources. So thinking from how we decide those features also define how resources are going to be allocated, which is a key central question on sustainability. We also took a look from the perspective of intelligence, understanding that they are embedded with computation and sensors, which allows us to collect data, process data, and also generate insights and actions based on the input of data that we can collect. So this notion of creating artificial intelligence and combining with human intelligence is also a key principle that we incorporated into those everyday infrastructures. And I already mentioned the notion of investable infrastructures. So the notion of how do we think about those infrastructures as investable. So keep in mind as you go through the presentations, as you watch the presentations, that those presentations, they were the result of a unique framing of where are our points of interventions from a design point of view. They are everyday infrastructures, and we are considering equity, sustainability, intelligence, and investment as key factors that drive the decisions that the groups of designers did for the project that we're going to be seeing. So we're going to start with the EV charging stations, and I invite the group to come and do your presentation.
So, welcome everybody. My name is Emily, and we are the EV team. There is Kemal, Isaac, Mitch over there, and Andrew. 5 of us work for EV charging problem prompt. Okay, go to the next slide. So we thought about investable infrastructure around electronic vehicle or something that can contribute around that space. But first of all, what is investable? We see this 4 elements. Our concepts should have 4 elements in order to say this is investable. So first thing is decarbonize, obviously, as well. This is repeating what Carlos said earlier, but something that contributes to sustainability. And secondly, decentralized, also repeating what Carlos said. Taking out the asymmetric power, distribute the power, that's have to support equity. Also digitalize, using technology, using data efficiently, create probably computation or insight. We should be able to use all the new technology and data. Lastly, long lasting. So anything we suggest should have potential and value in long term. Not just sounds cool, but also that's something like beneficial in a business-wide. But we see that electric vehicle is beneficial, but not everyone have electric vehicle. Why is it? One of the biggest barrier is lack of charging stations. It's one of the major barrier for EV user, especially in the US. And in US, probably also particularly, Tesla putting a lot of effort building EV charging station. However, non-Tesla EV owners struggle a lot more than Tesla drivers. And there is something like universal adapter exists. However, oftentimes it's more slower charging speeds only. The other barriers are charging obviously takes time. If you are likely found the fastest charging station, you can charge in 30 minutes, but sometimes take 12 hours, which is really long. And even if you find apartment, these days new apartments start having the charging station in their parking lot, however, maybe 2 or 3, and you come back from office, but if someone took that EV charging in the evening, you probably won't be able to charge that day. This is something struggle and stressful for the EV users. And inefficient energy usage, there's peak time during the day, people need a lot of energy, and during the night, energies are not used efficiently. So we should be able to do something on that, and EV cars being able to be part of it to contribute on these issues. So in the past 14 weeks, we explore a couple of prototypes. As also Carlos said, we create prototypes, and through the prototype, we did the research. And we thought we come up with 5 features that should exist at the same time in order to achieve desirable states. So the first one is universal charging adaptability. So maybe turn around. That's something you are familiar already looking at this, but we expect that these are universal, meaning that any EV car can plug in with that adapters. And secondly, autonomous operation. Probably without us walking through, it was difficult to tell, but the boxes we created is the autonomous robot. So now, as I said, if you have EV charging station, it's always stable, and you probably have to plug in. But that one, in the future, they will come to your car, and they will plug to your car, so you don't have to do it. You just have to reserve for robot to charge. And thirdly, bidirectional energy flow. So when you think about energy charging station, you think that you get energy. But ours actually is bidirectional, meaning that you can put your energy back to the charging station. And net metering exists with that bidirectional features, meaning that user will have incentive to sell back to the energy grid because with the demand of the energy, they sometimes can sell the energy expensive, for example, during the day, and that support optimization of the energy usage. And lastly, intelligent optimization. So those of the robot is not smart enough to come to your car, but actually when they plug in, they will read your car habits, tendency, user habits, and also combine with the data demands, and they will charge your car in the best optimal way. Like, have you seen these day icon when you plug in at night? It's actually say, we will charge you slower to optimize energy. It's a very similar function. So as I said, there is 5 features. We believe we should have the 5 features exist at the same time in order to reach to ubiquitous energy.
Okay, so we'll talk about the 2 archetypes that we came up with. The first one being mobile EV charging and the second one being energy exchange service. These 2 archetypes would exist as a combination of these features that we've come up with. So, many existing parking infrastructures allow for traditional fixed charging stations that take up space or maybe cost more when you want to retrofit. So mobile EV charging stations can offer this flexibility of charging deployment in situations and also act as a support to the energy grids. So let's look at mobile EV charging. We'll be sharing 2 ways how a mobile EV charging station can exist. First one being in form of an autonomous robot. A lot of private spaces like parking lots, shopping malls, entertainment centers like theme parks have lots of space. So these autonomous robots can operate in these tight spaces, in parking lots, or even in cities like on the roadside. So maybe partnering up with the city of Chicago to provide autonomous charging robots will increase EV accessibility and EV adoption, making it easier for citizens to buy and use electric vehicles. And another way of how these mobile EV charging stations could exist is vehicles themselves acting as EV chargers, particularly large vans or trucks. So maybe you are an EV owner and you're going on a long distance trip or a journey, and due to the lack of infrastructure, you don't have access to an EV charging station. So in this case, large vehicles like trucks, which often follow particular routes, expressways, so they can act as EV charging stations. So think of it like hailing your Uber. So you are basically hailing your EV charger, and which is paving way for innovative services to exist.
Thank you, Kamal. So I'll be walking you all through the second archetype, which is all about the exchange of energy. And so we're all familiar with the traditional model of charging one's car or refueling one's car, which assumes that the flow of energy is one way. So you get it from the station or the charger, it goes into your car, but it can't go the other way. As Amelie mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the features that we've identified as part of this archetype is bidirectional charging or bidirectional energy flow. And this is a concept that is starting to be explored just within the past year by a couple automakers, manufacturers, in conjunction with some local utilities. And so the idea is that cars will act. So cars will act as a form of grid storage and a backup service for the grid, essentially. So why is that important? Some of you may be familiar with some of the grid emergencies, for example, California faced in the past year. They had a couple extreme weather events, high temperatures, in which the government actually sent out mass notifications to citizens to ask them to reduce their energy usage during a certain time of day because the grid couldn't support the demand. So the idea is that grid storage, battery backups are one of the solutions to that kind of a situation, which is expected to happen with increasing frequency in the near future. What if that grid storage was in the form of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of EVs that are connected to the grid at the same time? And so this service of bidirectional charging energy exchange could be situated, for example, if you look at top right, in like a big box warehouse store that has hundreds of parking spots available with EV chargers. If at any given time during the day, let's say there are maybe a couple hundred cars that are plugged in and charging, if there's a grid emergency, then that parking lot could act as a unit of grid storage and backup to supply energy temporarily back into the grid. And so what's in it for the EV driver? Well, they would be compensated essentially for the energy that they provide back to the grid. And there's value being generated not just for the local utility and the business owners, but also for the drivers who are participating and would participate in this service. As you might have seen in a couple slides ago in the geographic heat map, there's significant potential for energy to be shifted not just across time, so cars that charge during the night and then making their energy available during the day when there is peak demand in the late afternoon, but also across space and geography. So for example, if there is a trend of commuters coming from one location to another location where there is significant demand, that mass of EVs can act as a source of energy that is shifted across space. Additionally, the optimization element of it is that the feature of variable pricing can act to induce supply and demand across time and space. So for example, if there is a predicted grid emergency later that day, the service might send out a notification saying any EV drivers who participate will earn 3 times the normal credit if they make their car available during that time period in order to create a supply of backup emergency energy. So, let's explore the future of EV charging together. Thank you.
Thank you, EV team. So We'll go to controlled environment agriculture team, so if you could join.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Our group was looking at investable infrastructures for controlled environmental agriculture. This is Emery, Anna, Ran, Jorge, and Younghee. I'm sorry, they're all sitting. You'll meet them eventually. And my name is Sunana. Apologies. Okay, so let's start with, the first thing I want you to do is think about a meal that you had. Let's think about a meal that you had yesterday, because I think most of us have had the sandwiches from today. And once you have that in your mind, so I think I'm gonna go with my lunch, which was grilled chicken and salad. Once you have that in your mind, how many of you are confident about where that food came from or where it was grown? And if you are confident, you can yell at me. Cool. Me neither. Comes from Julosco. But there's a likelihood that your food was either grown in a greenhouse, that it was grown on a farm, or if you're one of the lucky ones, it was grown in a personal garden. So when we think about what controlled environmental agriculture is, these are environments that use technology to control or monitor and maintain specific growing conditions, depending on what it is that you're trying to grow in that space. Examples of that are aquaponics, vertical farms, greenhouses. The reason we are so interested in CEAs as an industry is because they're not only projected to be a massive industry by 2030, but they're also consistently growing industry. So they're growing right now, they grew from last year, and they're projected to continue growing at least for the next, we don't actually know, for the near future, for the far future. Emery is going to talk about the benefits of designer and investor partnerships, specifically in the CEA space.
Okay, we can switch roles.
Yeah.
So as Carlos and the EB team talked about, our role as designers was to really think about what's possible in the area of CEAs, knowing that this is a future technology, potentially more and more of our food is going to be grown there. And a way that we were able to understand this was a metaphor that Jordan helped us use in thinking about real estate. So when you're looking for a house, you work with a real estate agent, and they're an expert at helping you find what type of house or apartment you're looking for that meets your specific specifications. And investors are like that. They're really good at, if you tell them this is the type of company we want to invest in, we think that it has a lot of potential for the future, they're going to be able to find that. Whereas designers, our expertise is in being more like the architects of the future and thinking about, hey, here's all the types of houses that would even be possible, and then informing the investors and say, hey, you might not have thought to look here, but we actually think there's a huge area of opportunity. So for us, it was really exciting to think about the full range of possibilities in the area of CEAs. And it's very tricky to use the down button. Yes. When we looked at all 8 of the prototypes that we made and we analyzed what principles were coming forward in addition to decentralization, decarbonization, digitization, and being investable, we realized that there were 3 main areas that we saw a need for change. The first is around default mindsets being really narrow. So that might be the fact that a lot of us don't know where our food comes from, the fact that there's this feeling that good food is expensive and inaccessible, and also the fact that farmers don't necessarily feel empowered to use the technologies of the future to grow their food in optimized conditions. So the first opportunity that we see is to expand mindsets. So educate consumers about where their food comes from, make it easy for them to access good food, and then also provide access for farmers to use the growing technologies. The second area is currently a lot of our food system is housed in centralized black box sites of production where only a few actors control what's being grown. And we want to see that shifting to more resilient networks where power is shared, there's decentralization, There's partnerships with new actors, so potentially, partnering with pet food companies, people who are currently incarcerated, actors who aren't currently thought of as players in the system. We want to bring them in because that's going to make the system stronger and more resilient for everyone. And then lastly, currently, the fact that a lot of decisions are driven by profit, which is bad for people, it's bad for the planet. And we want to have a values-driven infrastructure that is long-term, but that also finds ways to create value from things that aren't currently being valued. And so while we are super excited about the technological capacity of CEAs, I think one of the big things that came through in our prototyping research was that we can't just put a technological CEA in the middle of a system that is broken and expect it to work. So this was one of our major insights. And so we developed a list of 7 principles that will inform the 2 things that we're proposing. So you can read them here. I think they're very similar to what the other team talked about, but I think the specifics that's interesting is thinking about how it's going to actually be promoting justice, and so having not a values neutral approach, but it being an agent to foster justice in the food system, making sure that there is transparency in order to reduce power differentials, decentralizing food production, create increased resilience, expand stakeholders, create value out of that which isn't currently valued, and then find ways to shift default mindsets. And so these were the principles that helped us decide that these were the 2 prototypes we wanted to share with you all today. I'm going to pass it off to Ron and Anna, who are going to tell you about the first one.
So we're excited to talk about nutrition for the 21st century, which we call sustainable super protein.
To do the Sorry. It's so
This is what it's going to look like. You can see the full-size scale bottle over there. So the way we frame it is that this product is impossible meat meets superfood. So our product has a lot of protein like meat, but it's way healthier than meat. So that it also looks like superfood like quinoa or chia seed. Like it has lots of nutrition, but it looks weird when you see it for the first time. So there are several reasons that we think that is an effective idea. One of them is it's really easily adaptable. So the way we think about this product is that you can mix 1 scoop of protein with any kind of food. It can be smoothie, it can be burger, it can be pancake. You don't have to compromise your favorite foods. You can just mix it to get an ideal balance. And second part is that there is existing market already. There are several pet food companies that are already adopting insect in their pet food, and there are several more other companies that are potentially interested. So we are thinking of partnership with them and then scaling up to pet owners to scale up to human food. And third point is that they're super sustainable compared to conventional farming like cows, chicken, and pigs. We have educational poster sample over there, but there are several benefits. For example, cows emit 80% more methane than crickets, so there are lots of benefits in there. And we do acknowledge that there is a strong stigma against insect eating, so we broken down into 4 phases. So first of all, we partner with pet food company and then acquire the customer base. And the second phase is going to be educating masses. So let's say you're going to partner with museum, like food museum, and organize pop-up exhibits to test cricket-based food. And the third phase is going to be partner with retailers, offering products to local grocery stores, restaurants. And the final phase is going to be expanding this network to institutions and enterprises. So Anna's going to talk about the details.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Ron. So like Ron was mentioning, our service, or this first archetype, is really about insect-driven protein consumption. And so this is a general service blueprint of what that could look like. There's 2 main infrastructural components, the computation infrastructure and the actual CEA infrastructure. I'm going to walk through both, but the computation infrastructure is really there in place to help automate and monitor the actual growth and processing of all the insects. These are some of the main features around it that I'm going to talk you through in more detail, but just to go over them really quickly: prioritize fulfillment and delivery for the clients that we contract with, using data into intelligence to inform our CEA and insect production, really optimizing the workforce that we're trying to upskill to manage this whole system, obviously using insect as our protein source for more sustainable protein, and humane on-site processing that takes into account the ethical implications of using insects as our protein source. So to go over prioritized fulfillment and delivery first, what we're trying to propose here is that every single client that comes to our CEA would have a promised delivery timeframe from anywhere between 2 days to 2 weeks. And the way that this gets given to each of our clients or promised to each of our clients is based on an equity need scale that our computation infrastructure would create and assign to the clients. So every client knows when they sign up what their timeline is going to look like, but when they're actually going to receive their product could change based on that scale. And you can think of this as very similar to how the vaccine rollout happened for COVID-19. The next piece is the humane on-site processing. And so what we wanted to do here was recognizing that there are a lot of ethical implications with killing life, such as insects, for our own human consumption. And so what we try to do here was really capitalize on the best practices that already exist in this insect production for protein, and also really making use of the fact that if we get to freeze the insects to a really low temperature, they go into a hibernation state and we can help them gently transition over into the processing phase. Workforce development. So while we are proposing that our computation infrastructure will be able to monitor and optimize all of our CEA production itself, there will still need to be people who can oversee the computation component and have that data literacy to do so. And so what we want to do here is really make use of this new opportunity to upskill the communities that have been traditionally left out of this kind of work. So for example, in our case, we used the example of an incarcerated community and upskill them with the data intelligence and literacy that is needed to monitor and run our computation infrastructure. And then lastly, the insect protein, of course. The idea behind this archetype in the first place is using insect protein into a protein powder form. And so kind of trying to mitigate some of that stigma around it in the first place. There's a lot of education that we're planning to do with it, like Ron mentioned, but also recognizing that there's a lot of diverse markets already around it. So hopefully by using a protein powder form, it can be easily adoptable into all of our favorite foods, like Ron mentioned, and that there's already an existing market with pet food that we can use as our starting point. And with that, I'm going to move on to Jorge and Dennis, who are going to talk through our next archetype.
Thanks, Ram. For our second exploration in investable infrastructures related to controlled environmental agriculture, we wanted to look at a space that was it's as Emery mentioned, it's tricky to just come in and drop in a CEA into a system because they're not really cost effective and they bring in some other issues in terms of resource usage that you don't get if you just use the regular sunlight or natural resources. So when we started thinking about with little research, what is a place where we could play, where we could have a CEA come in and assist, we landed on high-value crops or high-value products that we can find anywhere in the world. Specifically, we took the example of the avocados. If you think of avocados as in today's day and age, we pretty much can get them year-round, and we can get them, at least here in the US, pretty much everywhere. But that doesn't mean that we don't know about the challenges that come by with the production of avocados. So this means that actually we're not really aware of when and how we could lose part or all of the production from them. So essentially we could be left with the olden ways of just having them when you are on site. What we are trying to propose is there a system, is there an infrastructure that we can come in and if not have the same amount of production, at least have an assurance of a more just and equitable and sustainable way of serving both markets and the people that are growing these crops. So a little bit of framing. This is like Fair Trade, which is an organization that is the members, the farmers. You can have some assurance that they're getting their fair share towards the crops that they're growing. And second, it's the AAA roadside assistance, which is not entirely insurance, but it's there as a backup when you need them to be free. So the points that we wanted to build into the system is, first of all, resilient networks. It's for value crops, they're usually in very specific geographical locations because they need very specific weather conditions or soil or another resource that's not available all over the globe. So taking into consideration that and trying to, in a way, decentralize it from the crop production. Second is consumer education, preferably in the form of, at the moment, education so they can make a more educated decision when they're buying or when they're researching their products. And a more transparent way of looking at the whole chain of production for crops. And third is taking into consideration that there are humans behind the production of all of these crops. So what does the holistic farmer support look like? Do they need support during climate disasters? Do they need support during times of conflict, violence, or civil unrest? And how does that translate into something that we can provide to them from our proposal or infrastructure? So to get into the details of what our system would offer, Dennis can walk us through this general service blueprint.
Hello, and so with that, we would like to present you our idea, which is called Agro-Alliance. So to just briefly explain about what our service looks like, there are several stakeholders that really play a key pivotal role within the service. The main ones being farmers, grocery stores, Agro-Alliance, us, and all of you guys who are consumers. So all of the service starts off with the farmers. Pretty much they have a conflict or they experience a conflict that completely halts their production, or even they might even face some kind of delay in their production. So then they go online and they search a little more about us and they can learn a little bit about our insurance plans or what we like to call produce match programs. So we offer a variety of plans that all have each unique benefits. They can be in the form of financial security, emergency relief services, even a global network of CEAs, to which then they can all benefit from. So once they're aware of what we are providing to them, they can contact us through WhatsApp or any forms of communication, to which then we will immediately report and activate our network of CEAs. To then we can pretty much be able to match what they need. It can be in the form of produce, in the form of security, and then we'll be able to send that directly to grocery stores. In the end, we have the goal of creating an environment of happy consumers at the same time happy farmers. So you might be wondering what those benefits are. So I'll start off with talking a little bit about grower safety through data aggregation. So we ensure grower safety through our dashboard that really, through one click, it informs not only the consumers or the farmers, what's going on. For example, what are the CEAs that are available to them, or what are the produce that are also available to them. But at the same time, it allows us to know what, when, how we can take action to immediately respond to them, or at the same time, what are the best alternatives that we can take in the case of conflict arises. Another one is global networks of CEA. I would like to put a little bit of emphasis in this one because it's really key of our service to operate. We need a global networks of CEA. So pretty much what global network of CEA is having a diversified or decentralizing pretty much the farms. We understand that the big problem is that farmers typically only have one farm. If they burn down, that's it for them. So we don't want to face the same problems as the CEA owners. We want to have a wide variety of CEAs that can respond adequately, at the same time properly in the case that a conflict arises, but also the same way the quote-unquote saying, you wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. We believe it's pretty much the same for CEAs. And this also helps us out with our demand in the case of a conflict arises, Number 4 could be emergency services. By emergency services, we can be a wide range of resources that we provide in the case of a conflict arises. This can be in the form of transportation. For example, they have some goods, but they have absolutely no way of transporting it. We can aid them in that kind of sense. But also it can even be larger things. For example, there's some kind of insecurity that is going on. We'll be able to provide, for example, safety services for them to continue operating in a safe environment for farming. Financial security is mainly talked about in traditional farming insurances. When it comes to financial security, what they do is that they give compensation, monetary compensation, as a form of alleviating the situation. However, the problem with that is that it's too present focused. They only focus on what's going on right now. They don't really take into consideration what might happen in the future. However, what we like to emphasize and what we like to bring upon is financial security in the form of also educating users through our products, and they can scan through a QR code to understand how they might be able to support the farmers. But at the same time, the biggest thing is that through our networks of CEA, we will be able to pretty much match their demand. For example, they lost 40% of their avocados. We'll be hopefully be able to match the 40% and directly send it to grocery stores so they can skip all of that and be able to get a monetary compensation or profit. Pretty much, let's say we sell one avocado, a percentage of that avocado profit will go towards them too. So I would like to take a step back and go to where we are currently right now. We strongly believe that we can create a more sustainable, equitable food futures, and the way to do so is through smart capital as well as smart capital allocation as well as investable infrastructures. Investing in these creative and unique infrastructures really is a way that not only ensures the just present right now, but at the same time a very sustainable futures. We do understand that there's still some work for us to do at the same time, and these at best are high fidelity ideas. But we like to emphasize that really anything big that has happened in the world started with a small idea. And with your help, we believe that we can make this idea a reality. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. So we'll move to the invert, and I think this is a very good segue. Because the inverter are also looking at some innovative ways to that they use, where they could use vertical farming and EV charging, and they are also looking at the whole invert as an investable infrastructure. So we'll start with Isaac.
Apologies as I switched to a PC.
Is that loud?
I was waiting for that.
I do have my Mac.
We've had
A little test.
So save your questions and comments to the end. We will have the three teams over there for not only answering and commenting, but also discussing.
All right. Well, again, name's Isaac Yoon. I'm the VP of Design with the Invert Chicago, and it is really our pleasure being here today. Many thanks to Carlos and Deaa, really through Daniel, actually, if you want to raise your hand again. He's kind of like our mutual colleague that really just got us connected about a month ago. And we just really hit it off well and just found a lot of synergy, just in terms of talking about kind of all these design challenges that we have in our world. And, we think we have one here to talk about today. So very briefly about me, I'm a professional engineer here in Illinois. I studied engineering, specifically civil, down at the University of Illinois, just a couple hours south of here, down in Champaign. Studied transportation and structures. In the first 15 years of my career, I was primarily in the consultant space, working on a lot of large roadway and bridge and airport types of projects. So a lot of the large highways and roadway systems around here I was a part of as well. So specifically with the invert, which has been the last 3 to 4 years now in my career, it's been focused on what do we do with the surface of a brownfield site, which we'll get into a little bit more about what that's about. And then is there a subsurface solution that we could provide to that? That's what the VR system there is trying to show, is that, hey, we can exist in large spaces, basically underground. And then certainly all the construction and the environmental impacts that are associated with this kind of a development and project, right? So there's a lot to look at with that.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be back at IIT. It's actually been several years since I've been here. I actually spent a little bit of time as an undergraduate engineering researcher here studying electrification and hybridization technology in transportation many years ago, back when I could confidently say I was an engineer. I've since kind of taken a lot of interesting turns in my career, so it actually feels good to be here at the design school because that's kind of where I started transitioning to many years ago. But again, my background is in mechanical engineering. Spent a few years working for a big car manufacturing company on some really cool electric autonomous vehicle technology. Financial crisis hit. All that went away, made a career move that led me to where I am today. But since then, I've spent some time here in Chicago as a community organizer, actually in the community that I grew up in on the far southeast side of the city, which is where this project is taking place. So it's actually really nice to be back home, kind of making a difference there. Spent a few years building an urban agriculture business as well here in the city. So quite familiar with some of these concepts of food and the environment and food justice and food insecurity and things of that nature. So really cool to hear some of those ideas as well. Eventually fell in love with the world of policy. That drove me back to school, got a business degree. Always wanted to come back to Chicago and find my way to the southeast side to tackle this brownfield problem, which I'm very lucky to be working on now. So excited to share some more about our project here today. I want to give a quick shout out to our sustainability consultant and engineer, Rachel. She's been an instrumental part of our project, making it as clean and green as we can make it. So with that, let's orient ourselves here. So this is a satellite image of the southeastern part of Chicago. So can't quite see the IIT area is probably up here somewhere off screen. So this lime green highlighted area, that is our property. So pretty far southeast outskirts of the city. I think the first southern suburb is out here. You can see Indiana's right here. So you go all the way down along the lake and you get to the southeastern part of Chicago. Was once predominated by the steel industry. So over 100,000 jobs in this community, all from the steel industry. It was once known as the workforce or the workhorse of the city, and the bulk of the steel that was used to build the skyline actually was produced here. Once produced the most steel in the entire world, which also came with some challenges because when you're producing steel at that scale, prior to the EPA, got a lot of environmental challenges to deal with as well. So obviously most of those jobs are all gone now, and what you see around this community is a lot of these types of abandoned Mars-looking brownfield sites. And so this is a zoomed in version of our property. Again, it's a 144-acre site, so it's massive. It's essentially split into two parts here. North is to the right now, so east is here at the bottom. There's this clean component of the property here that we call the invert east. Mostly overgrowth, a lot of shrubs, about 94 trees. There currently attracts a lot of unwanted illegal activity, a lot of fly dumping, not a very pretty site. But it does have a baseball field attached to it that is active, and it's part of one of the leagues down there, the East Side Little League. It's now actually called Invert Field, so that's kind of cool. Go across the railroad. So this property is bisected by a railroad, which, by the way, also makes it a little bit difficult to access. It's landlocked from the other side of the community. A lot of the people that actually live in the residential area here don't even know what's back here. It's hard to see, and obviously there's an active freight railroad right in between there. And now this is the more brownfield part of the property, a little over 90 acres. Again, does have some environmental contamination challenges from legacy pollution, which are mostly concentrated in about this bottom half of the property. A couple hot spots here and there that we are pretty well aware of where they are and can kind of design our solution around that. Two key pieces of infrastructure that are part of this property as well is that it turns out it's quite rare in the entire country to have a piece of property that has direct access to a railroad, class 1 railroad that can get you pretty much anywhere in the country, and an active dock that again can probably get you anywhere around the world. The river system, the lake system goes all the way down to the Gulf as well. So that very valuable infrastructure. So that all being the case, we'd like to think of our project as a design challenge. What do you do with one of these types of properties? Obviously has these environmental challenges in a community area that has been in need of and demanding jobs and investment for decades, and has all these valuable infrastructure assets as well. And our solution to that is to go underground and build a state-of-the-art underground business park, so to speak, that could bring thousands of jobs to the community and do it in a sustainable way. Now, one other important piece of context here is that this is a community area because of the legacy pollution and the legacy of industry here. There's been a lot of social tension in this region over the years. It's once thought of as one of the first places to start the unionization movement through the steel industry as well. When the steel industry literally shut down its doors and left overnight, left a lot of trauma for the surrounding community that, a lot of people lost their pensions overnight, and of course left a lot of polluted land. So there's quite an active group of concerned community members that are quite skeptical and cynical about any kind of proposed development, especially given that there have been a number of developments proposed over the past 10 years or so that have sold a dream of something new coming to the community, and it just never happened. It's just never happened. So we've made it a mission of ours to make community engagement fundamental to our community, to our development approach, and making sure that we're leading with community in mind, doing everything we can to give the community a voice and to actually help shape the project. So some of the images you see here is us out and about in the community. We actually built a community engagement center in the neighborhood where we host all sorts of presentations and conversations with the surrounding community. That's where we hosted a professor and some other people to really engage on our project. And it's been about 2 years now that we've been doing this, and a lot of great questions, comments, and feedback that have really helped improve the project. So hand it over to Isaac to talk about some of that.
All right. So like you said, this is a massive design challenge, right? We're looking at roughly 90 acres in our Invert West area, which is, again, it kind of looks like Mars if you're out there. There's so much crushed gravel and just crushed material and slag that's been sitting on that surface for many, many decades in essentially kind of an effort to just kind of cover up whatever has been down there, right, from before. The old steel plant was essentially situated in this area here. It's often used as a parking lot for Ford, right? So their Torrance plant is nearby, right? Which is where they currently make all their Ford Explorers, and some of the Lincoln Aviators are there. Back during the Volkswagen diesel emissions scandal, this was one of 5 sites in the US where they were temporarily holding all the cars there as well. So again, long story short, not a lot of high and good use, right, of 90 some acres on this side. Roughly the remaining 50 or so acres that are on the east side. So this is the cleaner side of the property. So then we thought, okay, we have a railroad here, we have a river here, these are incredible assets. How do we get around this stuff? What is one way that we can essentially bring value back? So we started looking into this, and through the course of the last 2 years, we then have kind of morphed into this plan here. So there's a lot here, and I'll kind of start from the top and work our way down. So we're talking about a subsurface facility that would essentially sit underneath this entire boundary of our property. Roughly 300 feet below ground for level 1 and approximately 375 feet below ground for level 2. But then on the surface, what we would do is we'd actually restore a lot of the land and bring back soil and install this version actually is like closer to 20 acres of solar field, right? But there's actually more than enough power then to power not just the Invert's facilities, but certainly the residences around it as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there. We would continue to use the marine transload and the rail transload. Again, having these assets already on site is huge, right? In that we don't have to invest too much more money in order to make those work again. What's most notable here is that we would build these two vertical shafts. So these are roughly 30 feet in diameter and about 400 feet deep, right? So we build two of them, and that's how the limestone that is underground, right? So we would carve away the limestone and all that is coming through these vertical shafts. That material then gets transloaded in via the river system or the rail system here. Right? So a vast majority of the material is going to be done that way. That's big because as with most construction projects, the number one question is all the trucking, right? And all the traffic that it's gonna have in my neighborhood and all the pollution that's from that. And so our goal is to not burden the community any more than whatever they've already been burdened with. So then, basically as we move to the east side here, what was made very clear to us from the community is that they really need some more, just a lot more community amenities, right, in this part of Chicago here. And there's already this baseball park here that's actually seen some investment back into it again, but then, you know, we have, I believe this is roughly 20 acres or so in this section here. Why not transform that into just this really nice recreational area that's for the public, right? That'd be maintained essentially by us, but you know, we could also provide a detention pond that's not just an ugly pond, but actually, you know, a nice recreational area, another soccer field, various community center and the parking around it. You know, so that's something that we would build first actually and get that going, as well as the solar fields over here. But the other great advantage of this east side, as we're contemplating going underground, is we can actually start the tunnel system then on the clean side of the property, right? And essentially we would have these two tunnels that would go for roughly 5,000 feet at a shallow grade and then loop its way around, and you eventually land at level 1, approximately 300 feet below ground, right? So again, think of these large interstate type tunnels that you would like see like in the Rockies or the Appalachians, right? So like that's the kind of the size of tunnels that we're talking about here. So the whole point is that you eventually make your way underground, and then of course you can then safely cross the railroad. Matter of fact, we've already talked to Norfolk Southern about this project, and their engineering team is actually, they've essentially signed off on the project because they don't see any issue like in terms of their operations on here. The other important thing to note is that the city of Chicago is already in the works of rebuilding Burley Avenue. So this road actually used to exist here, I want to say like during the steel days. It has since been, you know, like it doesn't really exist like in this part in here right now. So about roughly 12 years ago, the city then approved a phase 1 study then to rebuild Burley Avenue through this neighborhood. This is notable because right now the only way to get trucks up and down this area of Chicago is through Avenue O. And, you know, as you can kind of see, this is a very residential area. And so it's, you know, like it's also a safety issue, but it's certainly a nuisance for the community. So by the city of Chicago building Burley Avenue here, which they hope to do probably within the next 2 to 4 years, we can then build our entrance right off of that road. Again, less burden on the community, right? That's the central theme of what we're trying to do. A bunch of EV charging infrastructure, right? I mean, we've heard a lot of great examples of that here today. You know, that's certainly the wave of the future. You don't really see really any EV stations like on this side of Chicago at all. So why not fast track that development and bring it forward? And then certainly planting a ton of trees on this side as well. So this next image, so just imagine that you took a knife and you sliced right down the screen in the middle, and this is what you would see. So this is a scale cross-section of the invert, where the river is on your top left here. It's about roughly 30 to 35 feet deep in this part of Chicago. This is that dual tunnel system I was talking about earlier on the far east end of the property. There's your Norfolk Southern Railroad, and that's a locomotive, by the way, up there on top. So again, 300 feet to level 1, 300 feet, or 375 feet then to level 2. this is one of those vertical shafts I was talking about where it's roughly 400 feet deep. Then the material would essentially make its way out and then get transloaded off the site. The contamination is primarily found in this region in here, and it's found within the first 15 to 20 feet of the ground in this case. And in this part of really the Midwest, there's roughly 75 to 100 feet of soil and clay and sort of deposits from the last ice age. And at the bottom of that layer is what Chicago's famous for, its clay and its soil, and it's very much impermeable at that point. So there's a water table that actually sits right in that range there. That's where then the formations of limestone actually start in the ground. So going back about 3 years ago, we had done a lot of geological study of this area just to understand what's going on here. There's a limestone sample actually on the table. The local artist actually made it into like a little statue, but that's from one of the 5 cores that we took in the ground there. So, the 2 questions that we often get are, okay, what are you gonna do about water, and how does this thing hold up, right? Well, geologically, as we find ourselves in this depth of roughly 300 to 400 feet below ground, the structural rigidity of the stone is such that you can create what's called a room and pillar method of leaving behind these massive pillars that are roughly 36 by 36 feet wide. And then we would have ceiling heights of about 45 feet. So again, think large cathedral type rooms, right? These are not small caves. And there are thousands of these pillars that essentially we leave behind, right? So this entire facility just stands up on its own, really forever. So that's one thing we looked at. So then the other reason why we're 300 to 400 feet below ground is because the further you're away from the water sources up here, whether if it's the groundwater in here or the river here, the less and less water you're actually fighting as you go deeper, which at first may not make a whole lot of sense until you realize that these formations of rock get tighter and tighter and tighter, the further you go down. So again, this is kind of like our Goldilocks zone is what we like to call it. So this is, kind of that bird's eye view, like if you're able to peel the earth back and just kind of peek inside. Again, thousands of limestone pillars left behind. We're essentially creating a roadway network down in there, and about 40 to 60 buildings, right, is what we would propose to actually lease out, right, to the various tenants. So, it's, again, it's a mini city is what we're creating down there.
All right, let's talk sustainability, since this is a sustainability course after all. So, might actually be counterintuitive, but when you do a full life cycle analysis to this type of construction, we actually found that it's a significant carbon footprint savings compared to your traditional development. And that really first starts with the fact that we're carving this building out of the existing bedrock, which essentially translates to huge savings in terms of material consumption. So if you think about it, tons and tons of steel, of concrete, of roof, of glass, and all sorts of building materials that you would otherwise import from somewhere to build something on the surface. It all has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just magically appear. And then the majority of that material that's being removed from the site, again, gets to leverage that infrastructure that we have on the property. So most of it is actually going to leave the property either via the railway system or via the riverway system, which are significantly cleaner, more efficient ways of transporting goods in and out of an area. Then you have the fact that because this facility is underground, it's naturally energy efficient. So it's going to have a stable temperature and humidity year-round, about 60 degrees the entire year. Essentially translates to huge energy savings on the order of about 70% based on other similar underground facilities around the world. So that's quite substantial there. And then again, we're going to do a significant amount of greening of the surface, adding over 700 trees, doing quite a bit of ecological restoration. making sure that our entire project is aligned with all of the various local, city, and state sustainability initiatives, native planting, all of that good stuff. And then one other note I'll make here on the clean air technology, one of the key areas of concern for this surrounding community is air quality, given the industrial history of that area. It was once back in the 70s known as one of the biggest sources of cancer in the world because of all that steel production as well. So that still lingers even though the air is significantly cleaner in this day and age. But we've made it a mission of ours. How could we be a part of that solution? Is there anything we can do to actually design our project to clean the air as opposed to just further burden the air? So we've actually been researching various technologies that are used overseas in places like Asia and Europe that are, you can think of them as industrial grade, almost artistic, cool looking outdoor air filtration technologies. So looking at things like that as well. And then again, of course, the economic impact, which is going to be a real boon for the surrounding community, which really starts with the construction of the facility itself, which would be, an immediate over 700 plus annual average jobs from building the facility, everything that you've seen on the surface to everything that's going on underground. Once most of that material is cleared away, then people are going to come back in and start building that underground infrastructure, the roadway systems, 40 to 60 unique buildings that would house various forms of industrial and commercial tenants, which would then be the permanent job creators that would bring those new economy, modern, light industrial jobs. And so, again, very important for us to make sure that we're making all of this economic opportunity as available and accessible as possible to the surrounding community. So workforce development, business diversity, all those kinds of partnerships are integral to what we're doing, and we've been working very hard at developing those programs as soon as we can. And of course, big round number here in terms of the overall economic impact over the first 20 years of the development. Here's some images in terms of the target tenants and industries that we've been taking a look at. Everything from cold storage, which is actually in high demand. There's a huge need for more cold storage space here in the Midwest market. We've had conversations with those kinds of developers, with vertical farmers, all sorts of industrial manufacturers as well, light manufacturing and data centers, different types of industries that could really take advantage of the unique space that's safe, that's temperature controlled, urban agriculture, obviously, food distribution. We're going to be employing thousands of people in this facility, so all sorts of retail accommodations as well. You can imagine some stores, some restaurants, perhaps gyms, pharmacies, things of that nature. In our community engagement, we continually get asked by the community to make entertainment options and all sorts of recreational things as well. I was joking, I'd love to have a music studio down there, so all sorts of things. You can really just kind of let your imagination go.
Really good acoustics.
Great acoustics, great acoustics. And so with that, did you want to say anything else?
So we put together this video, it's about 7 minutes long, that, I think really encapsulates just kind of the message of what we're trying to do and frankly the region that it's in. The first second or two might cut out, so it starts off as the southeast side is what the opening remarks are.
Chicago was once home to over 100,000 steel industry jobs, vibrant community, and immigrants from all over the world. Our community never fully recovered after the industry collapsed, and many environmental obstacles stood in the way of redevelopment. But the invert took on that challenge with a creative solution to go underground.
So our plan at the Invert Chicago is to revive an old steel mill site and bring opportunity back to the southeast side to build a state-of-the-art subsurface facility that will create 6 million square feet of new real estate, 40 to 60 new businesses, over 3,000 permanent new jobs in the region, over 500 construction jobs.
Jobs in industries such as vertical farming, food distribution, office and retail, cold storage, light manufacturing, and more.
We often get asked by the surrounding community, has this ever been done before? And it turns out underground facilities are all over the place. They're here in Chicago, from Pedway, Lower Wacker Drive, underground parking garages, and all sorts of industrial and commercial complexes all over the world. And Kansas City is actually a prime example of underground industrial real estate.
I couldn't really wrap my head around what this idea was, this subtropolis underground. What I saw in Kansas City was a very innovative, sustainable ecosystem that I didn't think was even possible.
A lot of rhetoric is out there about how do you create a sustainable community with employment opportunities, with a good residential opportunity for folks to live in and play in. And I think this is actually the culmination and realization of that.
We need to build an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is bringing big development, which then employs or provides project opportunities to small businesses. Those small businesses then employ those individuals within those communities, which creates an ecosystem of opportunities and impact.
We're a blue-collar community. We know how to work with our hands, but we need more than just that, right? We need to be able to expand and be able to have different jobs. And that's what the Invert plans to do, to bring hundreds of construction jobs. But on top of that, thousands of permanent, diverse, new economy jobs that are sustainable and are gonna help generations to come.
And there is no location more ideal than the southeast side of Chicago.
It's an area that is strategically located, has these great logistical and transportation infrastructure assets that are incredibly valuable.
Our river is a working river from 92nd to 137th. It's the only way to the St. Lawrence Seaway. We have ships that come from Poland and Ireland and all over the world.
Anytime you can use water and rail, you mitigate your cost immediately. And the Invert would use both, primarily. It's the most economical.
So sustainability is really important to our team and is really central to our project. And it really starts with the fact that an underground facility is going to be naturally insulated from the outdoor elements. And that translates to substantial energy savings. And if you think about it, we're essentially carving the facility out from the existing bedrock underground. And because of that, we're needing significantly less building materials than you would otherwise need to import from somewhere else. You know, that's tons and tons of steel, of concrete, of roofing material, of glass, and all sorts of other construction materials that we just don't need to consume. We're also planning to build a substantially sized solar field, enough to power 1,200 homes, also looking at geothermal energy. All this to say, we're expecting significant carbon footprint savings compared to your traditional surface building.
And speaking of above ground, thanks to our community outreach efforts, we have a plan for the surface of our property too.
I know growing up, we had limited resources available. My daughter, we had her in softball, and we actually started traveling to our neighboring Northwest Indiana to have her compete at a higher level of softball. And that's when I realized, like, why do I have to travel outside of my own neighborhood to have this opportunity for my daughter? Like, there are so many kids in our community who want that same opportunity as my daughter, but unfortunately don't have access to it.
It's a big opportunity for the community to really be involved in the project. This is putting you at the table, involving you in the conversation, elevating your voice, your questions, your concerns, your ideas. Through these meetings and these conversations, we realized that we had to do something on the surface of the property. It was important to the community. So now it has evolved that the east side of the parcel will be recreational space for the community. And that means a community center, a soccer field, a softball field, a pond, and walking trails.
Even from my own organizing experience, I know that air pollution is a top concern in the surrounding community. So our plan is actually to improve the air quality through all of the native planting we're going to be doing, the ecological restoration on our property, and also by incorporating innovative outdoor air filtration technology as well.
So we're gonna beautify that industrial corridor so the community can be motivated and inspired by what they see.
So what's in store next for the Invert Chicago?
The story of our Southeast Side community for many years has been one of neglect, of environmental and economic challenge. This is a chance for us to rewrite that narrative together.
We want safety in the neighborhood. We want, people to economically succeed. We want all kids to be educated and all kids to be safe.
We have this legacy of being able to dream big and do things that people in other parts of the world never thought about. Even from our design, right? The skyscraper landscape in Chicago is something that is just worldwide, world renowned. The industry out here was world renowned as well. What does the next phase of industry in the US look like?
And it's innovative ideas like Invert Chicago that will challenge us to get there much sooner and much faster.
With development of this magnitude and development developed in this way, this is going to set the precedent for the future.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Liza. We'll start with a Q&A, or we'll end with it. So if one or two from each team could come here. And
Yeah, let's have Alberto, Isaac, and two from each team to go there. Of course, everybody will participate, but just...
It's gonna be, I think,
very formal, quick
discussion.
Have everybody socializing and... So I just want to prompt a point here of the discussion that one of the key concepts from the notion of everyday infrastructure is that they are always happening at the intersection of multiple systems. So you could see there is the natural systems from water and air to the community level, into the also to the economic aspects of that. So you can see multiple systems happening at the intersection of each of those infrastructures. It can be the real estate space in the parks, but it can also be the EV charging stations. It can be the control environmental agriculture. And what is fascinating was to see, and thanks Invert for coming, because what we saw in them was this interesting overlaps where one is using each other and build this kind of ecosystem. But it's an ecosystem that is of a very different nature and characteristics, because they all subscribe to this sustainability, equity, intelligence all together. And more important, this notion that they all requires long-term investment. So you're seeing an example of $6 billion of economic development. This is an example of something that is being now designed that will be there for decades, if not centuries. So this is the kind of work that we wanted to spark in the workshop, is the understanding that thinking about investable infrastructures is about thinking of the future and the impact in terms of now and large scale as we go through those transformations. So I just wanted to frame that. That's why we have this composition of people in teams. But I'm really open for questions, comments. I'd love to see what people have to say here. Rick?
Yeah, I think it's initially for the folks at Invert, but I wonder if others might chime in afterwards, because I think that it has implications to all of the other business models in some way. But as many things, it goes back to Paris. I think about 7 years ago I was there, and there's not a lot of very big buildings there. There's like a few very abrupt buildings, and I believe it's because they mined underneath limestone for building much of the buildings. And so it's like Swiss cheese under there. There's not a lot there that you can kind of put a big building on. So I'm wondering, first of all, if you're thinking about eventually, after you clean up the surface of the Invert 144 acres, will you be able to go up if you choose to do so? Are you leaving that option open? And secondly, are you eventually, after I know you have like a 20 or 30 year time horizon, are you able to go down even further as the, things change in the planet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've gotten versions of that question, but parts of that is actually unique, so I need a minute just to kind of think through that. But I am somewhat familiar with the Swiss cheese under Paris. I think I'm more familiar with how they've used it for
dead people.
Wineries, actually.
And wineries.
Yeah, there's this new push to move all their barrels down there just because of the constant conditions. So I have no idea how deep they are. I can't imagine that they're that deep.
They're not as deep as what you're talking about, yeah.
So, with 300 feet down, so we would have roughly cover about 225 feet above the top part of level 1. There's still almost 200 feet of bedrock that's above us, and so most building foundations, I think, should be able to penetrate that, and really wouldn't have an issue with that. That's a really interesting question. I have to look into that some more. The short answer to your other question is we could go down further if we wanted to, but at that point, it's a matter of demand. It's a matter of market. It's likely that we wouldn't be able to go immediately below level 2 just due to the vibration during construction of that. So we'd have to consider possibly even going deeper. There are subterranean facilities that go well over 1,000 feet deep, to where all of a sudden it's not 60 degrees anymore. It's starting to tick up 65, 70 degrees. You're like, okay, can we stop there? I don't want our ambient temperature to go above that. So, so yes, I mean the short answer is that we can certainly go lower if we wanted to.
Yeah, and the question I'm really asking, I guess, is like, you can actually think about it as an eventual growth pattern that you can kind of expand without really expanding the business model.
Correct.
And I'm wondering if any of the other teams think that their models can actually accommodate something like that, like the cricket food with franchises, or obviously infrastructure for EVs are nationwide.
Well, I was in the EV team, and I can't really think of anything directly connected to the EV. But like when you talk about the Paris example, I remember one experience with me is when I went to Turkey. In the middle of the Turkey, I was have to go through undergrounds because, well, that's particularly mainly because of their weather issue. In Turkey, it's really hot. You can't really build anything on the top, so many people actually live underground. But what was really interesting is they keep all the fruits and like grapes and everything and entire year on purpose, because that keeps really temperature stable. And what that really does is grape gets really matured, so it gets really sweet over the year, and it stays well and makes really great grape juice or the wine sometimes. So when I was watching the video, I was thought of like using underground is really, there's many way to do it, and connecting to the food safety security that there might be some potential to use the underground by thinking like it provides stable weather, you know, especially global warming and stuff. So it's just the ideas come up now.
I kind of wanted to add upon that. I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to CEAs is that it's a physical entity. It takes up space, it's similar to real estate. You have to vouch for that. It's not something that you can just continue building vertically or just or down south. And one of the great things about the idea or the concept of the invert is that there's a lot of space, and the beauty of CEA is that you can really grow pretty much anything and everything as long as the conditions are correct. And that's exactly what a CEA is. It's an enclosed space where you are able to provide those certain conditions. And I think one of the biggest examples of CEAs in some form of way is California, even in Chicago, is the cannabis industry. It's something that it requires such a specific environment for it to grow. It's a booming industry. It's growing at a rapid pace, and it's setting up a nice foundation and groundwork for other people within other vegetables produced to be able to follow in some form of way. And I think by utilizing underground space would be a very great or a good alternative of maximizing the usage of space.
Well, for that presentation, I have a question that builds off of the last one of a people-centered design twist. I'm curious, like, that's a pretty kind of like incredible capacity for tenable space, and you showed that portfolio of different, you know, use cases, and it seems like there's already a lot of demanding case studies in the wine industry and in CEA, and I'm sure in cold storage too. But I can't help but think with the mental health crisis of the pandemic and people even just like being in their own homes where maybe they can't afford windows with great like south-facing sunlight beaming in, how desirable it might be to be a human tenant in that kind of environment. It seems a little like claustrophobic, and like it might really affect mental health of, you know, especially South Chicago residents who always kind of get the short end of the stick, and now the only kind of accessible tenable space in high quantity that's coming to their neighborhood might exacerbate their mental health issues. So I'm just curious if that's something your team's wrestled with. I know it's just a challenging kind of aspect of the structure, and then if my peers have like solutions you'd like to offer.
So we've actually gotten the question probably half a dozen times of if we would ever plan to build residential down there, and the short answer is no, we would not. You know, this would simply be light industrial and certainly commercial spaces. If you think about your average big box warehouse that you see, especially along the highway systems, they almost never have windows to begin with. Now they do have like sunlights on the top of them for sure. But one way that we would address, you know, certainly the constant 24/7 indoor nature of the invert is really through the advent of LED lighting. We've come a long way in terms of spaces that are well lit and can frankly follow the motion of the sun, right? So that you can actually marry what's going on outside versus what's going on inside. So we certainly recognize that being an underground facility means that you're not literally going to see much of outside, but there is tech out there that is trying to address those things. There are certain ways that you can actually beam sunlight from the surface down several hundreds of feet downward, and essentially spread it out again. Right? I'm not really an expert in any of that technology, but I'm sure some of the folks in here are probably already thinking about it. But yeah, so you know, there's going to be constant lighting. The ventilation is going to be a key thing, right? So one of the interesting things that we found about subsurface spaces is that because it's right around 60 degrees year round, if it's really hot or really cold outside, which in Chicago we get that, right, both, the air will naturally flow, right? And so we've designed our space and to take advantage of that actually, where essentially you're gonna have air intake on one side and air, you know, if you'll call it exhaust on the other end. And then it actually reverses when it's then the opposite weather outside. Right? So the air will actually flow then the other way. In the rare moment that Chicago is actually 60 degrees and nice out, we'll have a significant HVAC system down below, you know, massive fans that, that will push the air because, that's a very critical component of the underground. Certainly for safety systems as well, making sure that there's good air.
I see. Just one thing. You also being a fellow UIC alumni. Are you familiar with UGL, the underground library that we had there?
Yes.
So for those who don't know what that is, literally just think of the ceiling right now as being the floor, and turn around and look behind you. There's a square right there, right? It's like kind of like a window. I was just wondering what's maybe the feasibility of or possibility of even maybe implementing something like that to your underground facilities where there's like a pillar of emptiness where there's windows. I do understand that might cause some problems maybe in I guess weight distribution maybe even, but I was just wondering maybe what do you think about that?
Yeah, we've actually tossed an idea around here and there of maybe building essentially light vents or more air vents. So, they essentially be these shafts, right, that we construct all around the entire facility for that very purpose, actually, to where then, you could essentially peek into the outside. The main issue that you run into is not, it's not necessarily structural, but actually has to do with water. Because the more openings you have through that groundwater level, then you have more risk. Well, and so, there are folks that have to deal with that all the time anyway. So essentially you have a sump pump system, right? So that you seal off the shaft around that groundwater and whatever then is seeping through that, it just gets pumped out. That's a good question.
I know I'm in the class, maybe I'm not supposed to ask a question, but I'm curious to hear from you all at the Invert and then also my teammates, about holding a vision for the future and building buy-in for that future, because it seems like that's something so special about what you're doing, and you're having to hold this really long-term vision in the face of lots of challenges. And I would imagine, it sounds like you all are being so thoughtful about bringing in lots of people and getting tons of feedback, lots of people telling you what about this, and I'm curious what sort of advice or lessons you have about how to tell stories about a future vision and what you've learned along the way.
That's a great question. A lot of trial and error. Frankly, Alberto has been leading us in that vision of understanding the local community, right? Which is, the facility is literally being built in their backyard, but the regional impact that it could have is so much bigger. So it's somewhat all encompassing in that you need local buy-in, but then you also need much higher levels of buy-in, right? Whether it's city, state, regional leaders, which include federal government as well. Getting investors and getting developers on board on this. What we know is that this model does work in the sense that these facilities are all around the world, but specific to getting Chicago's first subsurface facility going, there's a lot more time and resources needed than to get that buy-in.
So we have a question from the online.
Oh, good.
Good. So this question is coming from Nick, working for General Motors, and he has two questions for the AV. So the investable criteria fits very closely with our vision at GM. Zero emissions, zero congestions, zero crashes. The first question is, what are the methodologies or the processes defining the barriers for the AV archetypes? Was there any secondary data mining, interviews, open data resources, or what are the methodologies? The second question is the energy exchange solution is a very interesting framing of the core issues of ubiquity and adoption. Is there any diffusion models that you guys have played with on a larger scale when it comes to public usage of these kind of archetypes?
So first question is how we
Yes. So the methodologies, processes that you came about defining the barriers of the EV archetypes.
Well, so how do we come up with the barriers was a lot through the secondary research, and the barriers to implement that was find out the profit and scales probably. I actually calculated how many Whole Foods are there and how many apartment complex in Chicago existed, how many how long the robot can actually run, and that's to combine with technologies and what we have today and the future. That is really difficult to think, filling the gap. So probably that's the barriers, if I'm answering correctly. And the second question was?
The second question is, again, what is the diffusion model when you're thinking of contributing to create public utility like energy exchange? What might be the socio-political, socio-economic barriers of this diffusion?
Well, if you have some ideas, feel free to jump in. But for energy exchange, it sounds cool and it's interesting. And then the similar concept exists with solar panel, several across the world. And when it comes to EVs, through selling the cars, it means probably, at least in the first phase, people who have solar panel at their home will be most likely the seller of the energy. It might actually create the inequity. Someone who have money might have more solar panels. So this is adverse of what we wanted. But yeah, that's the one of the barriers that we were thinking. Do you have any addition to that?
Yeah, I can add one thing in response to the first question about barriers. I don't know if it's necessarily a formal process that we undertook, but one of the things that we looked at was the policy landscape coming into 2022, 2023 regarding the build out of EV charging, which has shifted massively just in the past couple of years with at the federal level, the Infrastructure Act that passed in 2021, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, have really put the U.S. From the bottom of the list to the top of the list in terms of money being spent on EV charging, supporting the state rollout of EV chargers and incentives for EV purchases. So in terms of barriers, I guess that was one of the things that we uncovered that was a barrier that had been significantly lowered for our prototyping rounds.
Any other questions?
I don't know how to answer this question, but so if you want to take your projects to an investor, are investors right now open to the ideas of equity, diversity, and inclusion? Are they open to investing in technologies that are not quite developed yet, but have that very, a lot of sustainability embedded with that? I don't know. What is the space they invest in? Are investors open to this kind of ideas at this time, or which investors? I don't know which investors. I don't know, from angel investors to investment, banking, whatever. I don't know enough to know.
Yeah, I could try to take this one.
How receptive would they be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I feel like I actually want to kind of bring up the Paris example because I feel like it was a really good analogy to explain kind of a way that I'm thinking about this. The way that I interpreted the Paris example was the actions of one thing kind of leading to the consequence or results in another thing. So, and then being opportunistic about that situation. So Paris kind of digging limestone, and then the result of that, then not being able to have high skyscrapers or buildings, and therefore then finding an opportunity within that. So I think generally, like, the truth of this entire 4 weeks was always just kind of finding ways where to play, how to win, and what was the last one? Where to play, how to win, and
Can you give us 3Ds or?
no, good. Where to play, how to win. The strategy thing,
Choose your team.
Yeah, okay, never mind. So it was just kind of a way to think about how we can inject ourselves in the system and kind of be able to sell kind of an infrastructure, an idea, kind of a system, like a combination of different products and services to address kind of a different levels of interactions with institutions, from kind of a business to business to a business to consumer. I think, like, when you think about, like, you know, to your question about are equitable, sustainable solutions investable, like, you know, even if you look around kind of this room, there's arguments to why these aren't already sustainable or equitable solutions. If you look at EV kind of manufacturing and what happens with, like, how they mine cobalt, like the battery that it takes to store energy, that's like a super unethical kind of like mining process that's happening in Africa, where, you know, entire villages are being pretty much forced to like work in these mines under like really terrible conditions. If you look at like, and then, you know, the answer to that is like the sustainable or the equitable answer to that is just, you know, if you're thinking about mobility and transportation, is to build more trams, but that's less of a attractive and exciting investment opportunity, and therefore we kind of try to find somewhere to work in kind of the current situation, which is like this trend and hype and excitement around EVs, and thinking about kind of how we can appropriate the current technology and make it work for, you know, years to come in kind of sustainable ways. So I think, like, to answer your question, no, you can't really sell equity and sustainability to investors. So I think the truth is, like, you figure out ways to create the current technology, like to appropriate the current technologies to be more equitable, to make it more digestible, to investors.
I think if I could actually add to that point, and maybe, I don't know if this is counteracting what you're saying, but I think something that's been really nice about this course is that we've had the room to explore in our own teams, like how we can push those forward, and having the support of Jordan, who's our other grad TA, who's got that more investor background and expertise, like working with those teams under his tool belt, and then having him bring in his feedback on, are these infrastructures that we're proposing actually investable, has been really valuable for us to figure out, like, okay, how can these things intersect? And so, yeah, maybe the fact of the matter is equity and diversity by itself, as of right now, is not investable alone. But if we can show that these things can stand with, like, decentralization, digitization, and decarbonization, those were the three, like, components that Jordan brought to us, being like, this is what's going to really be the future of investable infrastructure. And so if we can show that, okay, these equitable systems that we're proposing can also address all these three things, so you should be able to invest here, that was kind of where at least our teams were really trying to push for. So showing that you don't have to compromise on the two, and there is possibility there as long as we can push for it. But it did always have to go back to the argument of, like, okay, this is investable regardless, and, like, going by your standards of what investable really means, and then showing that all these pieces can also still fit into it and play into it. And then also showing precedent for other examples where it has happened. So for example, like the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, where it was prioritizing the people who needed it first and then rolled out to everyone else. So that was kind of being able to pull on those threads to weave into it, to be like, there is already a successful case for this. So we could push that forward more.
Nice, thank you.
I think at the end of the day, like, you have to show some return, right, for the investors. So that's just, you know, I mean, we're constantly having to sharpen our pencils all the time about, okay, all right, so we tried that, that's not going to work. Or what if we went that model? That's not going to work. And so, but, you know, for the development or for the product or for whatever it is that we're designing, for it to advance forward, there has to be some level of return then for the investor, and that's just the cold hard truth, right? So finding that intersection, right? I mean, like, once you found it, then go.
like just for I totally agree with what everyone said, but I also coming from the business side, and I believe this is my struggle. Like, oh, this sounds all good, like it's doing everything great for the society, but if I'm actually in the business side, am I gonna invest that? Like, I just always have to stop. But I think I understood that it's a matter of how we share the story with the stakeholders, like he said. And for example, in our thing, like we introduce maybe Whole Foods or some of the business organization. If you say, if you invest in here, and if every Whole Foods have our mobile robots, then you will attract more EV customers. Then they will have some benefits, or some kind of story tailored to each stakeholders might help to get those investment. That's how I think, but yeah, I totally agree with what everybody said.
Thank you so much. So let's give a round of applause for everyone. Thanks everybody for joining here. I think we could just stay here, mingle around, and just also would like to thank everyone who joined us online. This is our final. By the way, we will be sharing on sustainablesolutions.design the work and the reports that has been produced. So if you could tune in on the website starting next week, you will find the results and everything that we have put together. Thank you everybody, and there are some food available.
If people want to experience the VR over there and go back to the projects and talk to the teams, we will be kind of phasing out as people are interested or need to leave, okay? So thank you very much for all of you. Congratulations on your excellent work. Thanks, Invert, for coming here.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And thank you everybody online for also your
you too.
participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.